Before I get started, I do consulting on where you can move. I'll work with you to find the perfect place for you to move to. There's more information at the end of the video about that. Now let's get started. The upper Midwest has the Rust Belts. It's the cities where car makers left town. The Carolinas have the Rot Belt, places that have been hit hard by a decline in farming jobs. Up here in Iowa, they have the Pork Belt. This is the east side of Sioux City, Iowa. This is the side of town where a lot of food is processed. Most of what's processed here is meat. They ship in the animals and they're processed into pieces that we eat. Think of these plants not as assembly plants, but DISassembly plants. Sioux City cornered the market on meat packing 70 years ago. It was a pretty big deal. You can make a pretty good wage in these slaughterhouses. But things are different here now. There have been job losses, and this city's economic fortunes have changed. Because this place isn't as important as it once was, Sioux City has a bad reputation. Iowans say Sioux City is run down and crime-ridden. I'm sure you're thinking, Iowa has bad places? I guess. This is sorta untechnically the second worst place to live here. But bad for them may not be bad for you. The crime here is lousy for Iowa, but it's not nearly as bad as it is in really bad places in this country. It was day 12 on my tour of the Midwest, and I'm here because Iowa says Sioux City sucks. Is Sioux City still a place that's bad? Iowa thinks this place is sad. Who'd have thought Sioux City, Iowa would look like South Beach? But it did on this night. This is the Pearl District on the south end of downtown. The only part of downtown that's actually kind of fun. Down here, folks are close to being out of control, but at least people are having a good time. Right across the street is the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. 8 years ago, this place opened up downtown, and there was a lot of controversy. People thought it would bring in bad people and crime and drugs. It did, but it also revitalized a part of downtown that was blighted and dangerous. Turns out, if there's going to be trouble in town, this might be the extent of it. But it's not that bad here, and it's not that bad citywide. It's a fairly nice place to live, actually. So after spending a day here, I had to wonder, why does Iowa say Sioux City sucks? To answer that question, let's go back to the east side of town. It's on this side of town that the city's reputation stands.
Pork shoulder and ham meat are taken from this picnic boning line and used for the manufacture of Spam, the most popular luncheon meat in the country.
Back in the 1960s, Sioux City was a big deal. Its stockyards sold more livestock than anywhere else in the country. The smells from the yards and packing plants were referred to as the smell of money. Back then, Sioux City was the biggest city in Iowa that wasn't called Des Moines. However, today is different. A lot of the companies here left for nearby rivals Omaha and Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where the taxes are a lot lower. China can process meat a lot cheaper, and Hispanics have moved to the area, and they'll take far less pay. They'll do anything as long as their back is strong. Today, there's still a dozen of these meat processing plants left, and you can still earn a great wage here. You could easily make $85K a year, plus benefits, but the jobs are much harder to come by these days. You almost have to kind of know somebody to work in one of these factories. It's just dangerous and often inhumane work. This place has lost more than just these highly sought meatpacking jobs. Tech companies have left too. The job scene here isn't a downer though. Sioux City's managed to keep itself going. There's still a lot of money to be made here in transportation, warehousing, manufacturing, distribution. There's ethanol processing, cereal manufacturing, and paper production. A lot of the jobs here aren't glamorous, but you can make up to $100K. And living in Iowa, that goes a long way. Also in town are Sioux Bee honey and Jolly Time popcorn. Imagine that. That's cool. So even though a loss of jobs has given Sioux City a bad reputation, it's no different than any other river town in Iowa. A lot of Iowa towns have been plagued with job losses. A big change in economic fortunes could break a city, But maybe Iowa's different. There's some nice areas on the outskirts of town, but much of the housing stock close to downtown is pretty beat up. But keep in mind though, beat up for Iowa is average for you. This might be considered the worst part of town where the crime and drug use is the highest. Meth is a thing here, as are slumlords, clearly. But is it really dangerous here? Here's a map of the crime in Sioux City. Not looking good, but it's little baby gangbanger type stuff. A lot of people here aren't Iowa nice, but it's certainly not Chicago or anything. I mean, look at this. There was a big rumble in Sioux City this year because of a rise in shootings. A recent headline said that shootings were up 555%. Oh my gosh, 555%? Look at the verified shots fired trend. 10 shootings, 9, 59, 10. 59 shots fired is bad? In a year? That's like one a week. There have been 59 shots fired in St. Louis since this video started. Come on now, people. Is Sioux City a good place to live? If spending $150,000 on a house is good, then yes. Here's what you get for $31K here. It's just so cheap here. The population here has gone down by a teeny bit, but it seems people just don't want to leave. They either have a good life or they realize things are worse out there in the real world. Here's the fancy side of town. Homes on this street sold for $300K, still far below the national average. You could live in a smallish city in Iowa in a nice neighborhood like this and not have to worry about much at all. It isn't fancy or anything, but it's clean. Downtown Sioux City is not too bad, actually. Most of it's just really empty and quiet at night. A lot of downtown is what it looks like after everybody goes home at 5 o'clock. It felt weird to walk around on totally empty streets in a downtown, but not feel scared. There's some panhandlers here, but I'll tell you what, there were no homeless people anywhere. Look at this alley. This might be the cleanest and safest alley I've ever seen. I mean, look at the damn thing. On one end of town, there was a lot more going on than I thought little old Sioux City would have. I mean, it was Friday night, but damn, Sioux City, some parts of town go off. I guess that might be good or bad, depending on how old you are. I showed you the real party spot in downtown on the south side. That was wild. All this used to be abandoned, but then the casino opened up across the street and it gave everyone a lot more party in their pants. The casino itself is packed on Fridays. I walked around for a while. I hardly saw any shady people. That's odd for a casino of this size. Clearly there were drunk people everywhere and it was rowdy in some places. But the Fuchi mamas were in check. And $7.50 for a double vodka soda? What the? Downtown Sioux City was much worse 20 years ago. But guess what? They actually started enforcing criminal activity. They cracked down on prostitution and the drunken publics and just ran the assholes out of town. Good for you, Sioux City.
Fans, be sure to come back tomorrow as the Sioux City Explorers take on the Chicago Dogs for Game 2 of this series.
While I was here, I did a lot. I was lucky enough to get tickets to the Sioux City Explorers game. It's an independent baseball team with a neat little stadium on the edge of town. While you're in your seat, you can sit back and watch all the sheep and cows get shipped in. Cool stadium. Too bad it wasn't more packed for a Friday night. There's nothing like a minor league baseball game on a summer night in the Midwest. I'll tell you that. And hey, I also got to meet the team's mascot, Slider. However, my minor league losing streak continued. They lost 2. That's 3 minor league games in a row where the home team lost. Damn. Living in Sioux City might be better than the nearby alternative. At least there's something to do here and the place isn't completely dying. Earlier in the day, I stopped in a place on the state line called Omaha, Nebraska. There's only 26 people left here. Hello? They have a main street, a second street, and a third street. Most are some variations of paved. This place probably won't be here one day soon. Good people, though. You could say they're happier way out here, even though they might not be as wealthy. That's just how it is in rural Nebraska, Iowa. Folks just like their simple life. It's been said that West Iowa is the best Iowa. I'd have to say if West Iowa is the best Iowa, then the rest of Iowa is going to be a letdown. This place is okay. It's not bad. It's improving. Iowa's big cities are going to have to change. They've probably held on to their blue-collar industries longer than they should have, but they're trying to turn things around. Yes, they filmed Children of the Corn near here. Yes, the airport code for the place is SUX. And yes, it smells like a sewer here. But if this is bad for Iowa, then Iowa's got it pretty darn good. The next day, I would see what the most dangerous place in Iowa supposedly looks like. But I'm already starting to wonder if Iowa even knows what bad really is. All right, so thanks for joining me, Matt. I went to Sioux City. I like Sioux City. One thing about Sioux City is a lot of people in Iowa say Sioux City sucks. And why would that be?
Well, so since Sioux City's in the far northwestern corner of Iowa, we're fairly separated from the kind of the population center of Iowa, such as it is over in the Des Moines Cedar Rapids corridor, and so Sioux City has a reputation that, as a native Sioux City area person, I don't think is fully deserved, but first off, we're separated enough from the rest of the state that Sioux City people always kind of feel like we're on our own and kind of ignored by Des Moines in particular. And on top of that, Sioux City is and it certainly was a heavy industrial town, largely based on the meatpacking industry and the stockyards. And so, just the nature of that business, I think people have a negative view of it that way. But, Sioux City is actually a very nice town and really isn't the way it was, say, 50 years ago.
I know. I was like, okay. So I went to Sioux City and I'm like, Iowa says Sioux City sucks. I went there and I'm like, does Iowa live in a bubble? Because if they think this is bad, I've seen way worse. This would probably be a nice place to live in some of the cities I went to. So I kind of feel like y'all live in a bubble in Iowa. That's what I think.
I think so. I think, I'm not sure why that reputation is what it is, other than, Sioux City has been, like, in terms of population, kind of stagnant for the last 50 years. It hasn't really declined in population. It's been hovering between 80 and 85,000 people during that time. And actually, the Sioux City metro area has grown pretty substantially. So Sioux City's population kind of peaked about 1960, just shy of 90,000 people. But at that time, our metro area, which includes southeast South Dakota, northeast Nebraska, had about 107,000 people. Well, today, Sioux City is about 82,000 people, but our metro area is more like 144,000. So the area has grown, but we're in we have a bit of an issue because we border South Dakota. South Dakota has no state income tax, and they have some advantages business-wise. So there's just across the river is North Sioux City, South Dakota, and there's a lot of former Sioux City businesses that are actually located in South Dakota today.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So in the 50s and 60s, Sioux City was a very important community because, the river and then the stockyards and manufacturing. And those are things that we don't do as much of now. Is that what happened to Sioux City that was once important?
Yes. So Sioux City, first off, the packing industry is still very large, but it's changed dramatically since the 1960s. The whole industry changed, actually, largely because of innovations that started with companies in Sioux City like Iowa Beef Processors, and that just revolutionized that industry. And eventually, it basically ended the whole stockyards concept to the central public market as had existed for about 100 years. On top of that, Sioux City was an industrial city. So I compare it more to like the Rust Belt cities, like, a small version of, say, Pittsburgh or Cleveland, it was something like that. And so Sioux City had been based on heavy industry since the late 19th century, and actually was Iowa's #1 industrial center throughout the late 19th through most of the 20th century, Sioux City manufactured more goods than any other city in the state of Iowa, and was the second largest city in Iowa until about 1970. And so today Sioux City is Iowa's fourth largest city, and it's just, for instance, today Des Moines always been a lot larger than Sioux City, but Cedar Rapids, for example, which today has around 200,000 people, 60 years ago, back in the 1950s, was actually smaller than Sioux City. And so there's been a change in the economy, of course, deindustrialization and things like that. And Sioux City was slow to adapt to that change.
Mm-hmm. So technology changed, interests changed, and I guess our consumption habits. And then y'all are located next to Nebraska and South Dakota, which have very, I guess, corporate friendly tax laws.
Absolutely.
And so it's just kind of 3 or 4 big things have changed. And so I guess a lot of jobs have left, and Sioux City is not as important as it used to be. Is that a good way to summarize it?
That's right. In the end, so for instance, our nearest competitor as a city is really Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which is about 100 miles north of us. And until the 1970s, Sioux City was quite a bit larger than Sioux Falls. And today, Sioux Falls is about twice as big as Sioux City, or even a little more than that. And so, there's a lot that goes into that, but certainly Sioux Falls' economy is much more service-oriented, information technology. Now, 100 miles south of us is Omaha, Nebraska, which is a much bigger city, more like 500,000 people. But Omaha has always been much larger than Sioux City. But we're kind of in an unfortunate position today where we're kind of right between these two larger cities, and Sioux City kind of occupies the place it is, and it's more of a matter of maintaining than it is like a chance to experience rapid growth any longer.
Mm-hmm. The factory jobs, the manufacturing jobs, the meat packing plants, I hear from people that work in them, they pay very well. They're actually hard to get those jobs. Like, you got to know somebody to get in there, and once you're in, you kind of don't want to leave. But at the same time, they're soul-sucking jobs that you work long hours, they're grueling. Is that a fair way to describe the blue-collar jobs in Sioux City?
Well, certainly. So the meatpacking jobs have always been, as far as labor jobs, manual labor jobs are concerned, have always been fairly high paying, even going back a long time compared to other types of labor oriented jobs. But certainly since the 1960s, there's been a general unwillingness for particularly the white laborers to want to work in the packing industry. And so it's the packing industry, and this actually would go back to when immigrants were coming in from Europe as well in the early 20th century. It has always been a magnet to immigrants. And so most of the people that work in the packing industry in our area anyway, and I would imagine in most areas, tend to come from our recently arrived immigrants, and mostly in our case from Latin America, and to a lesser degree Southeast Asia. And so for instance, back in 1970, Sioux City was about 97% white, and today our Hispanic population is about 20%. That's a pretty dramatic change, which is no doubt connected to the packing industry and how it's changed over the last 50 years.
Yeah, I saw the same thing in Florida. White people don't want to work in the fields. It's heavily Hispanic down there. I would imagine that's a big reason. I heard, the Hispanic population in the Midwest is going up dramatically because of the agriculture and the meat packing jobs that they will do for less pay, I guess, is just the straight up way to put it. They work long hours and don't demand unions, and they just keep their head down. And white folks don't do that all the time anymore. So.
Right. I mean, that's the old story with immigration to the United States, is immigrants have always filled a very important economic role that large people that have been here longer tend to not want to do. And so that's always been a driver of the U.S. economy. And that's no different today than it was 100 years ago.
So is Sioux City trying to diversify itself? Are they trying to grow to kind of get away from the previous history of being meatpacking and manufacturing, the old 50s and 60s era blue collar jobs? Are they working on trying to get more modern with some of the jobs that they're trying to do?
Absolutely. So, Sioux City's economy is quite a bit more diversified than it used to be. It's still there are still some fairly large industries, and the packing industry in the Sioux City area is still important. But for instance, even in the 1990s, it was actually in North Sioux City, South Dakota, but in the Sioux City area, Gateway Computers was started here and became quite a large company for a time. About 6,000 people in Sioux City worked there. And so, but that didn't last. The technology industry as well eventually became more of a coastal, especially West Coast based industry. And so at a certain point, making computers in the middle of the United States just, wasn't necessarily a going thing. But there certainly are other white collar jobs in Sioux City, whether it's in banking or in different types of information technology. And something that we've noticed in post-COVID pandemic is there are, because so many people in data-oriented jobs don't have to work at an office. There are people moving back into places like Sioux City because housing and such is cheaper, and a lot of people enjoy living in a smaller city, and so we are getting people moving in that maybe don't necessarily work in Sioux City in Sioux City-based jobs.
Yeah, the whole reason I went on this trip, part of the reason, was to show people that I kind of feel like the Midwest is the last great place to live that's affordable in the country. So I spent time in Nebraska, Kansas, South Dakota, Iowa, Missouri, to show people that, that it's affordable, it's safe. There's not the BS that you see on the coasts, especially on the West Coast and up in the Northeast part of the country. A lot of people are changing their where they want to move. And I think that the Midwest is a great opportunity for people to go. I think the weather is probably the only real factor that's going to deter people. I know Midwest winters can be brutal. I lived in the Midwest for a while, but besides that, I like Iowa. I like Sioux City. I don't see what the problem is at all. I think Iowans need to get off their high horse and stop making fun of you guys, man.
I agree, but we've kind of over time embraced it. Back about 30 years ago, our airport call sign even was SUX. So sucks, which it was just typical. And so, but instead of being mad about it, we sell all kinds of T-shirts and things that have the sucks label, and we use that all the time. So, you make the best of your reputation that you can. But what you're saying is absolutely true about the Midwest. I think it's always been job based. People move where the jobs are. And so a lot of Midwestern people have over time have moved to the coast, but oftentimes if they get a chance to come back, especially if they still have family where they came from, they try to make their way back if they can. But the Midwest, when you're located in the middle of the country, it's easy to go either way if you want to travel and such. But in that way, we're well positioned. I think the Midwest. At one time, the American economy was nationally based. And so being in the Midwest was a major advantage because we were halfway between both coasts. But as the economy became more globally oriented, then being in the middle of the country isn't such an advantage. And that's where the coast really became more important economically.
Why is Iowa a great place to live?
Well, for one thing, we have great schools. We have really good infrastructure. There's good roads all across Iowa. I was just saying the other day to somebody, Iowa really has no isolated areas because it's basically a big garden. I mean, Iowa is farmed from border to border. And so unlike, say, like Nebraska or South Dakota and Minnesota, we don't have places that are actually truly wild. I mean, Iowa is settled. There's basically a road, at least a gravel road, every mile all the way across the state. It's a big checkerboard all the way across the state. And it's probably one of the few states that's true of. Because the whole state is farmable, and so we have good infrastructure, and it's a great place to live. From you don't have huge cities, but you have cities nearby that are big enough to be interesting. I mean, it's not hard for us to go to the Twin Cities up in Minnesota or down to Kansas City in Missouri to get to a larger city, or even to Chicago. So I think most Americans actually prefer to live in a town around 100,000 people, and that's kind of what we have in Iowa.
You didn't mention lack of a-holes, which is my biggest reason why I like Iowa the most. Everyone's super nice. There's no real attitude. You don't get that a lot in the country where everyone's just kind of chill and nice and friendly and genuine. It's a shame, but there's few places left that we have that here.
That is true. There is something to that. Now we have a-holes here too, but there is a Midwest just way of treating each other that is a real thing. Whether it's saying hi on the sidewalk or whatever, that hasn't been lost completely like it probably has in other parts. And there's not quite the anonymity that there is in some of the more populated areas. So there is a certain small town quality that is still in Iowa for sure.
Well, Sioux City was stop 2 out of 6 stops in Iowa. So there's gonna be a lot of Iowa videos for the next couple of weeks, and I hope people don't get bored. But I'm trying to show that I really do think that Iowa deserves a whole 2 weeks of videos, 5 or 6 videos in a row to show off how great the state is and how unique it is. And
well, we definitely appreciate it. And even though I'm from Sioux City and we're a little bit, we have a little bit of an attitude about the rest of the state. The rest of the state is quite great. I like Des Moines and Cedar Rapids as well, but it is kind of a fun back and forth where we being out in the West, I suppose we have our own identity a little bit.
I mean, God, you people in Iowa live in a bubble. I swear to God.
We do. I think you're right. I think we are. We do.
Are you looking to move and need advice? I do consulting. That's right. I'll sit down and talk about where the next perfect place for you and your family should be. I do it all the time. Together, let's find you a new home that's safe and checks all your boxes. You can get my email in the description to find out how I can help you find your perfect relocation. And I can also help you find your new house too. Email me and I'll work with you on not just helping you figure out where to move, but I can help you find your perfect home too. That's right. I know awesome, reliable agents all over the country, and I'd love to connect you to somebody who can help you search for that perfect home. Hey guys, if you learned something new about America or what it's like to live in America, great. You should think about subscribing and turning on your notifications. You can also click one of these videos or playlists for more. You can also now buy my songs on iTunes and other formats. Click the link in the description. Thanks for watching. And remember, while we all might have different views, we should all be nice to each other and try to make the U.S. a better place in a positive way.
This is Sage, Nick's manager. This has been a Corner House Entertainment production.